Most people imagine the Middle Ages as a time of knights, castles, and kings. But for most humans who lived then, life was none of those things. It was hunger. It was cold. It was disease. It was fear. And yet, millions of ordinary peasants woke up every morning and survived. Tonight, we tell their story. Welcome to History Without Sleep, a place where the past is not rushed, not shouted, and not sensationalized. Here, history unfolds slowly, one quiet moment at a time, so you can learn, relax, or gently drift into sleep. Settle in, breathe deeply, and let the noise of the present fade away. And before we continue, if you like my video, then please like, comment, and subscribe the channel. Your support helps keep these long, peaceful history stories alive. Now, let us return to the medieval world. A medieval peasant was not born into choice. They did not choose their land. They did not choose their lord. They did not choose their work. They did not choose their fate. Most peasants were born in the same village where their parents were born and where they would die. Their world was small, a cluster of wooden huts, a muddy road, a church bell, and fields stretching toward the horizon. Beyond that was danger. Forests hid wolves and bandits. Roads carried soldiers and tax collectors. Cities carried disease. So peasants stayed close to home. Not because they were ignorant, but because survival required caution. A peasant's day began before sunrise. The body rose, even when it begged not to. Cold seeped through thin walls. Smoke from the hearth burned tired eyes. Bread, dark, coarse, and heavy, was eaten slowly, because it had to last. Men, women, and children worked. Everyone worked. Fields needed plowing. Animals needed feeding. Tools needed mending. Water needed carrying. There were no days off. Only days less painful than others. Hunger was not an emergency. It was a companion. Harvests depended on weather. Rain that came too late, or too early, or not at all. One bad season could mean starvation. 2 bad seasons meant death. Peasants learned to stretch food, adding bark to flour, boiling thin soups, saving scraps like treasure. They knew hunger, the way we know time. Always present, always ticking. It's easy to ask, why didn't they fight back? But rebellion required strength, weapons, organization, and food. Peasants had none of these. Their lord owned the land. The church owned their soul. The king owned their loyalty. Disobedience meant punishment. Fines, beatings, prison, or worse. Survival often meant silence. Faith was not optional. The church explained everything. Hunger was God's test. Disease was God's punishment. Death was God's will. Prayer gave meaning to suffering, and meaning made pain bearable. When life offered no control, belief offered comfort. And yet, despite plague, famine, and cruelty, peasants married. They laughed. They told stories by firelight. They sang while working fields. They survived. Not because life was kind, but because humans are resilient. And this resilience will be tested again, very soon. Because something darker than hunger or cruelty was approaching Europe. Something invisible, something unstoppable. Long before microscopes, long before medicine as we know it. Disease was a mystery. It had no clear cause, no visible enemy, no cure that could be trusted. For medieval peasants, sickness arrived suddenly and stayed as long as it wished. In the medieval village, people lived close together. Homes were small. Animals often slept indoors. Waste ran through open ditches. Clean water was rare. A simple cough could spread from house to house in days. A small wound could turn deadly. Infections had no name, only symptoms: fever, swelling, pain, weakness, death. People didn't ask what caused sickness. They asked who had angered God. Without science, peasants explained illness through belief. They thought disease came from bad air, evil spirits, sin, witchcraft, God's punishment. If illness spread through a village, people believed the land itself was cursed. If a child died, parents searched their memory for something they had done wrong. Fear mixed with guilt and made suffering heavier. Doctors were rare and expensive. Most peasants relied on herbal remedies, prayers, charms, bleeding, holy water. Some treatments helped by accident. Most did nothing. Some made things worse. Yet people trusted them. Because hope, even false hope, was better than helplessness. The church became the healer. When medicine failed, priests offered blessings, confession, last rites. If someone recovered, God was praised. If they died, it was said their soul was saved. Faith softened fear, and fear was everywhere. Plague was not new. Long before the famous Black Death, Europe had already faced epidemics: smallpox, typhus, dysentery. Each outbreak left villages smaller. Each one taught peasants that survival was uncertain. But nothing prepared them for what was coming next. When disease appeared, peasants rarely fled. They couldn't abandon land they didn't own. They couldn't leave family behind. They had nowhere to go. So they stayed. They worked while sick. They prayed while coughing. They buried their dead quietly. Life continued, because stopping meant starvation. Peasants were not weak. They were enduring. They lived knowing each day might be their last. Yet they woke up anyway. They fed children before themselves. They shared bread with neighbors. They helped bury the dead, even when afraid. This quiet courage was their greatest weapon. For generations, peasants had learned to live with sickness. But soon, death would arrive, on a scale never seen before. It would move faster than rumor. It would kill richer and poorer alike. It would empty villages, silence churches, and reshape history. And it would be known as the Black Death. It began quietly. A cough in one house, a fever in another, a sudden death that felt wrong. No one knew its name yet. No one understood its path. But within weeks, entire villages were changing. The Black Death had arrived. The plague did not care about age or strength. Strong men collapsed in fields. Children fell ill overnight. Healthy bodies turned weak. In a matter of hours, symptoms were terrifying: sudden fever, blackened swellings, vomiting, pain that stole breath, death within days. Some died in 3 days, some in 1. There was no warning, no cure, only fear. Peasants did not know about bacteria or fleas. They believed God was punishing humanity. The air was poisoned. Sins had finally become too great. People burned herbs. They rang church bells. They held processions. Some whipped themselves in public, hoping pain would please God. Others locked their doors and waited in silence. As death spread, normal life collapsed. Fields went unplowed. Animals wandered untended. Markets fell silent. Houses stood empty. Doors open. Food untouched. Church bells rang so often, they lost meaning. Graveyards filled. Mass graves appeared. Peasants buried family members with their own hands, often at night, often without ceremony. Some villages turned on each other. Strangers were chased away. Travelers were blamed. Minorities were accused of poisoning wells. Fear made people cruel. But fear also revealed kindness. Neighbors fed orphaned children. Widows shared bread. The sick were not always abandoned. Humanity flickered, even in darkness. For the first time, peasants saw something strange. Lords were dying too. Knights fell from horses. Priests collapsed at altars. Nobles fled castles, only to die on roads. Death did not bow to power. This changed how peasants saw the world. Quietly, slowly, but forever. Many peasants survived by chance. Some had natural resistance. Some lived in isolated areas. Some were simply lucky. They did not know why they lived. When others died, survivors carried guilt and gratitude. Entire families vanished. Entire villages disappeared. Those who lived were changed. When the plague finally slowed, Europe was quieter. Nearly half the population was gone. Fields lay empty. Labor was rare. For the first time, peasants were valuable. And this would change everything. With fewer workers, lords could no longer command easily. Peasants demanded wages. They moved to better land. They refused unfair treatment. Power began to shift. Not loudly, but unmistakably. The Black Death had not just killed millions, it had cracked the old order. When the plague finally loosened its grip, the world it left behind was not the same one it had entered. Fields were silent, villages were smaller, and everywhere there was absence. But in that absence, something unexpected appeared. Opportunity. Before the Black Death, there were too many peasants, and not enough land. After the plague, there was too much land, and not enough workers. Crops rotted in fields. Livestock wandered unattended. Lords faced a problem they had never known. They needed peasants. For the first time in centuries, the people at the bottom had leverage. Survivors realized something simple, but powerful. Their labor mattered. A peasant could leave one estate and find another lord, willing to offer better terms. Some demanded wages. Some asked for fewer obligations. Some refused to work without fair treatment. It wasn't rebellion. It was negotiation. Quiet, persistent, unstoppable. The ruling class panicked. Kings and nobles passed laws to freeze wages and force peasants back into old roles. They declared workers must accept pre-plague pay. Movement was forbidden. Disobedience was punishable. Peasants did not march with banners and swords. They resisted by walking away, working slowly, refusing contracts, moving secretly at night. They knew their value now, and value is power. Even the church struggled to adapt. Many priests had died. Faith remained, but authority weakened. Peasants still believed, but they questioned. Why had God spared some, and not others? Why did lords live in comfort, while others suffered? These questions did not explode. They simmered. Freedom did not mean comfort. Peasants still worked long hours, faced hunger, lived with disease. But now, there was movement, a sense, small but real, that life could improve. The plague became a memory that peasants carried quietly. They had seen the powerful fall. They had buried their dead. They had survived the worst. Fear of lords would never feel the same again. These changes did not end feudalism overnight, but they planted seeds for revolts, for wage labor, for a new social order. The medieval world was still harsh, but it was no longer unmovable. Plague had reshaped society, but hunger had not vanished, and neither had oppression. Peasants would face new challenges: failed harvests, taxes, and wars they did not choose. Survival would continue to demand strength. Plague could arrive suddenly. War could pass through like fire. But hunger stayed. For medieval peasants, famine was not a rare disaster. It was a shadow that followed every season. Farming depended on nature, and nature was unpredictable. Too much rain drowned crops. Too little turned fields to dust. Cold summers ruined grain. Early frost killed hope overnight. There were no reserves, no imported food, no safety nets. One failed harvest could push a family to the edge. Two failures meant starvation. When grain stores emptied, peasants became inventive. They boiled nettles, roots, bark, weeds. Bread became darker and thinner. Soup became mostly water. Meat was rare, saved for festivals or the wealthy. Hunger forced patience, discipline, and creativity. Children suffered most. Small bodies weakened quickly. Illness followed hunger. Parents fed children first, often skipping meals themselves. Many children did not survive winter. Grief became part of life. Quiet, constant, accepted. Peasants survived famine, not alone, but together. Villagers shared seed, tools, labor. Those with a little more helped those with nothing, not because they were saints, but because tomorrow they might need help too. In theory, lords were meant to protect their people. In reality, help was inconsistent. Some opened grain stores, others raised taxes anyway. A peasant never knew whether mercy or cruelty would arrive first. Religion shaped how peasants viewed hunger. Fasting was holy. Suffering had meaning. Priests taught that hunger purified the soul. For peasants, this belief turned pain into something bearable. Famine weakened bodies. Disease followed easily. Starving peasants could not fight illness. Many famines ended, not with food, but with death. Hunger taught peasants to save when possible, to waste nothing, to fear bad weather, to respect the land. These lessons passed from parent to child for generations. Medieval peasants did not expect comfort. They expected survival. Each full stomach was a victory. Each winter survived was a triumph. As if plague and famine were not enough, there was still the Lord. There were still taxes. There were still wars, fought by kings, but paid for by peasants. And that struggle was far from over. Even when the fields were calm and disease stayed away, peasants were never truly free. Above them stood the Lord, not a distant king, but a man whose shadow fell directly across their lives. The Lord owned the land, the mill, the oven, the forests, the courts. Peasants did not farm land. They borrowed it. In exchange, they owed labor, crops, money, obedience. Refusal was not an option. Several days each week, peasants worked the Lord's land instead of their own. This labor was unpaid. Fields had to be plowed, crops harvested, roads repaired. Even during famine, the Lord's land came first. A peasant's survival was always secondary. Peasants paid taxes on harvests, animals, marriage, death, even grinding grain required payment at the Lord's mill. There was no escape. Every part of life had a cost. Lords held courts. They judged disputes, but rarely in favor of peasants. Punishments were harsh. Fines, beatings, imprisonment. Justice protected power, not people. Rebellion was dangerous. Lords had soldiers. Peasants had tools. Punishment was public, to inspire fear. Yet obedience was not only fear. It was habit. Feudal life was all they knew. Resistance existed. In quiet forms. Peasants worked slowly, hid grain, feigned ignorance, left land secretly. Tiny acts, but meaningful. Some lords protected villages. Some reduced taxes during famine. Some punished abusive officials. Life depended on who ruled. Mercy was inconsistent. Cruelty was reliable. Living under control shaped peasant minds. They learned silence, patience, endurance. Hope was small, but not absent. Despite oppression, the world was slowly shifting. Peasants had tasted leverage. After the plague, they remembered. And when pushed too far, they would rise. For centuries, peasants endured. They bowed. They labored. They waited. But endurance has limits. And sometimes, when pressure builds too long, silence breaks. Peasant revolts rarely began with speeches. They began with hunger, with new taxes, with soldiers taking grain. A final demand. Pushed too far. Rebellion was dangerous. Peasants lacked training, weapons, leadership. Failure meant death. So revolts only erupted when survival felt impossible. In England, new taxes followed the plague. The government demanded money from people who had already lost everything. In 1381, peasants marched. They demanded fair wages, an end to serfdom, justice. For a moment, power trembled, but the revolt was crushed. Leaders were executed. Promises were broken. Yet something had changed. Even failed revolts mattered. Lords remembered fear. Kings adjusted policies. Serfdom slowly weakened. Change came quietly. Not through victory, but persistence. Most resistance remained peaceful. Ignoring unfair orders. Moving to towns. Negotiating wages. Peasants learned that survival could include defiance. Punishments were brutal. Public executions. Confiscated land. Families ruined. Yet memory survived. Stories passed down. Whispered by firelight. By the late Middle Ages, peasants were no longer invisible. They appeared in records, in court cases, in negotiations. Slowly, they became participants in history. Plague had weakened power. Famine tested endurance. Revolts reshaped fear. The medieval system was not destroyed, but transformed. Despite change, life remained harsh. Disease lingered. Hunger returned. Wars continued. But peasants were no longer entirely powerless. Despite plague, despite hunger, despite control, life continued. Not loudly, not comfortably, but steadily. For peasants, family was survival. Homes were crowded. Privacy was rare. Everyone worked together. Children learned early, not through lessons, but through labor. Parents passed down skills: farming, repair, cooking, patience. Knowledge was practical. Every skill mattered. Marriage was less about romance and more about stability. Two people meant two workers, shared risk, shared survival. Villages functioned as extended families. Neighbors watched children. They helped during illness. They shared tools and labor. Alone, survival was unlikely. Together, it was possible. Work followed seasons. Spring meant plowing. Summer meant tending. Autumn meant harvesting. Winter meant repair and endurance. There were no weekends. Rest came only when weather demanded it. Yet work had rhythm, and rhythm brought familiarity. Peasants found joy in simple moments, A full harvest, a warm fire, a shared meal, a village festival. Music, storytelling, and laughter briefly pushed hardship away. Joy was not constant, but it was real. Faith shaped daily life. Church bells marked time. Saints offered hope. Prayer gave structure to suffering. Belief did not erase pain, but it softened it. Death was familiar. Children learned its presence early. Funerals were common. Yet death did not end life's meaning. Peasants mourned, then returned to fields. Life demanded continuation. Peasants were not heroes. In shining armor, they were resilient. They endured not with glory, but with patience. Without peasants, there were no kingdoms, no cities, no armies, no churches. They built history with their hands, even when history ignored them. The medieval world would eventually fade. New systems would rise. Old orders would fall. But the endurance of peasants remains one of history's greatest quiet achievements. No one wakes up and realizes an era has ended. Change arrives quietly. Through habits, through laws, through memory. For medieval peasants, the end of their world did not feel like an ending. It felt like slow transformation. Feudal bonds loosened. Peasants moved to towns. Wages replaced obligation. Contracts replaced tradition. Serfdom did not vanish overnight, but it weakened with each generation. The world became less fixed, more uncertain, and slowly more open. Towns offered something rare: choice. Peasants could become craftsmen, merchants, laborers. Life was still hard, but freedom felt different. The phrase spread. City air makes you free. Education expanded. Printed books spread ideas. Beyond churches and nobles, people began asking, why do we live this way? Must power always be inherited? Can change be planned? The medieval mindset, built on acceptance, slowly gave way to curiosity. Faith remained strong, but authority fractured. People questioned church power. Reforms followed. Belief became more personal, less controlled. Plague, famine, and oppression left scars, but they also taught resilience, adaptation, survival. These lessons shaped the future. They left no grand monuments. They left fields, villages, traditions. Knowledge passed quietly. They shaped history without claiming credit. The Middle Ages faded into the early modern world. New systems rose. Not perfect, but different. Peasants became workers. Workers became citizens. Change remained slow, but it continued. The medieval peasant story is not one of defeat. It is one of endurance, of surviving the worst, and continuing anyway. And now, as this long journey through the medieval world begins to slow, let us rest for a moment among the people who lived it. Not kings, not conquerors, but ordinary men, women, and children who carried history forward, one quiet day at a time. They woke before sunrise. They worked until their bodies ached. They endured hunger, disease, and fear, with no promise of reward. And yet, they lived. They laughed when they could. They loved when possible. They hoped, even when hope felt dangerous. They survived plagues that emptied entire villages. They survived famines that tested every limit of the human body. They survived lords who controlled land, labor, and life itself, not through rebellion alone, but through patience, cooperation, and an unbreakable will to continue. Their story reminds us that history is not shaped only by great names. It is shaped by hands working soil, by families sharing bread, by communities standing together. When the world grows cruel, if you listen closely, You can still hear them. In the rhythm of farming. In the quiet strength of ordinary work. In the resilience passed down through generations. The medieval world has faded, but its people remain, in every life shaped by endurance. And as the night grows quieter, let the weight of their story settle gently around you. Let the noise of the present fade into distance. Let your breathing slow. Let rest arrive. And before we close, if you liked my video, then please like, comment, and subscribe the channel. Your support helps keep these long, peaceful stories alive for anyone who needs them. Thank you for spending this time with history without sleep. May the past watch over your dreams, and may tomorrow feel a little lighter. Good night.